Hollywood, March 1987. The Beverly Hills Hilton was buzzing with nervous energy. Tonight was the Academy Awards, and Michael Caine was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his role in Hannah and Her Sisters. He'd been nominated before but never won. This felt different though. The critics were unanimous. This was finally his year. Caine sat in the green room backstage, adjusting his bow tie and running through his acceptance speech one more time. He'd written it on a single index card, nothing fancy, just a few words about craft, dedication, and the importance of never giving up. But he wouldn't need that speech because sitting across from him was Jack Nicholson, chain-smoking and grinning that famous devil-may-care grin. "You nervous, Michael?" Nicholson asked, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "Should I be? Well, you're up against me for Best Supporting Actor, and I've got 3 Oscars already. The Academy loves giving awards to people who already have awards. It's like a rich person's tax break." Caine smiled diplomatically. He'd known Jack for years, had worked with him twice. Nicholson was talented, no question about it, but he was also notorious for his ego, his need to be the center of attention wherever he went. "May the best man win," Caine said simply. "Oh, the best man will win," Nicholson replied, stubbing out his cigarette. "Question is whether the Academy will recognize who that is." There was an edge to his voice that Caine didn't like. An assumption that the award was already his, that Caine was just there for show. But before Caine could respond, a production assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Nicholson, you're needed for the pre-show interview." Nicholson stood up, straightened his tuxedo, and headed for the door. But then he stopped and turned back to Caine. "You know, Michael, I've been watching your career for a long time. You're a solid actor. Really solid. Perfect for those British working-class roles. But this category tonight? This is for the big boys. This is for actors who can disappear completely into a character, not just play variations of themselves." The words hit Caine like a slap. Variations of themselves. It was the old criticism, the one that had followed him his entire career. That he was just Michael Caine in different costumes, not a real actor capable of true transformation. "I mean," Nicholson continued, "you do that charming Cockney thing really well. Very appealing to American audiences. But let's be honest about what tonight represents. This is about serious acting, method work. The kind of psychological depth that changes how people see a character forever." Caine felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I see. Look, don't take it personally," Nicholson said with that famous grin. "We all have our strengths. Yours is being likable. Mine is being unforgettable. Both have value in this business." And with that he was gone, leaving Caine alone in the green room with a burning anger he hadn't felt in years. 20 minutes later, Caine was backstage waiting for his category to be announced. The Best Supporting Actor nominees were gathered in a small holding area, making nervous small talk. Nicholson was holding court, telling an animated story about working with Stanley Kubrick on The Shining. "Stanley made me do that. Here's Johnny's scene 127 times." Nicholson was saying, "Most actors would have given up, would have delivered something safe and acceptable. But I understood what he was after. He wanted madness. Real madness. Not performed madness, but something that came from deep inside." Several younger actors hung on every word. This was Jack Nicholson after all. 3-time Oscar winner, legend of method acting, the man who'd redefined what American movie stars could be. "The difference between good acting and great acting," Nicholson continued, "is whether you're willing to go to those dark places inside yourself. Whether you can find the character's truth even when it's ugly, even when it's uncomfortable." He glanced at Caine. "Some actors are content to stay on the surface, to be charming and professional and safe. Nothing wrong with that. It's honest work. But when we're talking about awards like this, we're talking about transformation. We're talking about actors who become someone else entirely." Caine had heard enough. "Jack, can I ask you something?" Nicholson turned, that perpetual grin still in place. "Shoot. You've seen Hannah and Her Sisters?" "Of course. Woody's a genius. Great film. What did you think of my performance specifically?" Nicholson paused, sensing potential danger but too confident to back down. "Like I said, it was very you, very Michael Caine. Charming, professional, exactly what the role required. Exactly what the role required, Caine repeated. Interesting way to put it. The other nominees had gone quiet. They could sense tension building, the kind of moment that could either dissipate harmlessly or explode into something memorable. Jack, tell me something, Caine continued, his voice still conversational. What do you think Elliot's journey is in that film? What's his arc? Nicholson looked slightly annoyed at being quizzed, but he answered. He's having a midlife crisis, cheating on his wife, trying to recapture his youth through an affair with his wife's sister. That's the plot, Caine said. I asked about his journey, his internal transformation. Look, Michael, because here's what I think you missed, Caine interrupted, his voice getting sharper. Elliot isn't having a midlife crisis. He's having a moral reckoning. He's a man who's built his entire identity around being the good husband, the reliable provider, the steady one. And suddenly he's confronted with desire that threatens everything he believes about himself. The holding area had gone completely silent. Even the production assistants had stopped what they were doing to listen. The affair isn't about youth or excitement, Caine continued. It's about discovering that he's capable of betrayal, that the person he thought he was is a fiction, and the real journey of the character is learning to live with that knowledge, to forgive himself for being human instead of perfect. Nicholson's grin had faded slightly. Now Caine said, You mentioned transformation. You're absolutely right that great acting requires it. But transformation isn't always about putting on funny voices or adopting extreme behaviors. Sometimes it's about finding the universal truth in a very specific experience. He took a step closer to Nicholson. Every man watching that film sees something of himself in Elliot. The capacity for betrayal they didn't know they had. The disappointment in themselves for being less noble than they imagined. The struggle to rebuild their self-image after it's been shattered. Caine paused, letting that sink in. So when you say I'm just playing myself, you're missing the point entirely. I'm not playing Michael Caine. I'm playing every man who's ever discovered he's not the person he thought he was. And I'm doing it in a way that lets the audience recognize their own capacity for moral failure without hating the character or themselves. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then one of the production assistants whispered, Holy shit. Nicholson cleared his throat. That's an interesting interpretation. It's not an interpretation, Caine said firmly. It's the performance. It's what's actually on screen if you're watching carefully instead of looking for tricks and techniques. But Caine wasn't finished. 20 years of condescension from method actors, 20 years of being dismissed as a lightweight, was coming out all at once. You want to talk about going to dark places, Jack? I went to the darkest place there is. The place where you realize you're not the hero of your own story. Where you understand that your capacity for self-deception is limitless. Where you face the fact that love and betrayal can coexist in the same heart. His voice was getting louder now, carrying beyond the holding area. Other people backstage were starting to notice. And I did it without screaming, without breaking furniture, without any of the external displays that people mistake for depth. I did it with a look, with the way I held my shoulders, with the pause before I answered my wife's questions. Nicholson opened his mouth to respond, but Caine cut him off. You know what your problem is, Jack? You think acting is about showing the audience how brilliant you are. Look at me. Look how I've transformed. Look how I've disappeared into this role. But real acting isn't about the actor. It's about the character. It's about serving the story, not showcasing your technique. The holding area was packed now. Word had spread that something was happening backstage and people were crowding around to listen. When I played Elliot, Caine continued, I wasn't thinking about winning awards or impressing critics or proving how deep I could go. I was thinking about a man whose entire world had been turned upside down by his own choices. I was thinking about how to make that pain real and recognizable without making it theatrical. He looked directly at Nicholson, and apparently I succeeded. Because here we are, nominated in the same category. The difference is, you think this nomination validates your approach. I think this nomination validates the character. Elliot's story got told truthfully, and people responded to that truth. Someone in the crowd actually started clapping, then caught themselves and stopped. You said this category is for the big boys. Caine said. You're right. It's for actors who can handle big emotions, big transformations, big truths. But big doesn't always mean loud, Jack. Sometimes the biggest transformations are the quietest ones. Nicholson stood there for a moment, his famous confidence visibly shaken. He wasn't used to being challenged this directly, certainly not in front of an audience of his peers. Then something unexpected happened. His trademark grin returned, but it was different now, less arrogant, more genuine. "You know what, Michael? You're absolutely right." The crowd stirred. This wasn't what anyone had expected. "I did miss all of that," Nicholson continued. "I was so busy looking for the technique that I missed the humanity, and that's actually the exact opposite of what good acting should be about." He extended his hand to Caine. "I apologize. What I said was condescending and wrong. You delivered a masterclass in subtle emotional truth, and I dismissed it because it didn't look like the kind of acting I do." Caine shook his hand, his anger dissipating as quickly as it had built. "We just approach it differently, Jack. Your way works for your roles, my way works for mine." "No," Nicholson said firmly. "Your way works for any role that requires emotional honesty. My way only works when the role calls for, well, Jack Nicholson." The crowd laughed at that, and the tension finally broke. 5 minutes to air," a production assistant called out. As they were led to their seats in the theater, Nicholson fell into step beside Caine. "Can I ask you something?" Nicholson said. "Sure. How do you do it? How do you find that truth in a character without all the method stuff?" Caine thought about it. "I listen to people. Really listen. Not just to what they say, but to what they don't say. To the spaces between the words. To the way they hold themselves when they think no one's looking." They'd reached the wings now, where they'd wait to be called to their seats. "Most people are carrying some kind of pain," Caine continued. "Some disappointment, some regret, some fear. And they're trying to hide it while simultaneously hoping someone will see it and understand. That's the human condition right there. That's what every character is dealing with, whether they're a gangster or a king or a suburban husband." Nicholson nodded slowly. "And you find that in yourself?" "I find that in everyone, including myself." "Yeah, but the character isn't me. The character is what happens when that universal human truth gets filtered through their specific circumstances, their specific choices, their specific way of being in the world." "Places everyone," the stage manager called. They took their seats in the audience just as the ceremony began. When the Best Supporting Actor category was announced, both men sat calmly, no longer competitors but colleagues who'd found mutual respect. When Caine's name was called as the winner, he was genuinely shocked. He'd been so focused on the confrontation with Nicholson that he'd forgotten about the actual award. As he made his way to the stage, he could see Nicholson applauding enthusiastically, a genuine smile on his face. Caine's acceptance speech was brief and heartfelt. He thanked Woody Allen, his fellow actors, his family. But then he said something unexpected. "I want to say something about the craft of acting. It's not about proving how clever you are or how deep you can go. It's about serving the story and serving the character's truth. And sometimes that truth is quiet. Sometimes it whispers instead of shouts. But it's no less powerful for being gentle." He paused, looking directly at Nicholson in the audience. "Great acting comes in many forms. What matters isn't the technique. What matters is whether you can make the audience believe, whether you can make them feel, whether you can help them recognize something true about the human experience." The applause was thunderous. Backstage after the ceremony, reporters crowded around both men, having heard rumors about their pre-show exchange. "Mr. Nicholson, there are reports that you and Mr. Caine had some kind of disagreement backstage. Can you comment on that?" Nicholson looked at Caine, then back at the reporter. "Michael and I had a conversation about different approaches to acting, and he taught me something important. He reminded me that the goal isn't to showcase your technique. The goal is to disappear into the character so completely that the audience forgets they're watching a performance." "So there was no conflict?" "There was a misunderstanding," Nicholson said. "On my part, I made some assumptions about Michael's work that were wrong and insulting. He corrected me, and I'm grateful he did." The reporter turned to Caine. "Mr. Caine, how do you respond to criticisms that your acting style is too naturalistic, too close to your own personality?" Caine smiled. I think those criticisms come from a fundamental misunderstanding of what naturalistic acting is trying to achieve. The goal isn't to show the audience how different you can be from yourself. The goal is to find the truth of the character and present it so honestly that it feels natural and inevitable. But don't you think there's value in the more theatrical approach? Absolutely. There's room for every kind of acting. Jack Nicholson's theatrical intensity is perfect for the roles he chooses. My more naturalistic approach works for the roles I choose. The mistake is thinking one approach is inherently superior to another. Later that evening at the governor's ball, Caine found himself at a table with Nicholson and several other actors. The conversation turned to favorite performances, and Nicholson brought up Caine's work in The Man Who Would Be King. That's actually a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier. Nicholson said, Michael's playing this British soldier who gets caught up in delusions of grandeur. On the surface, it could have been just adventure movie heroics. But Michael finds all these small moments of doubt, of fear, of recognition that he's in over his head. He took a sip of wine. What makes it brilliant is that you believe this guy could actually exist. He's not a movie character. He's a real person who happens to be in an extraordinary situation, and that makes everything more dramatic, not less. Caine appreciated the analysis. That's the thing about Kipling's characters. They're ordinary men who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. The drama comes from the gap between who they think they are and who they actually are when tested. Like Elliot and Hannah and her sisters, Nicholson said. Exactly like Elliot. They talked for another hour about craft, about different approaches to finding truth in characters, about the evolution of film acting over the decades. What could have been a bitter rivalry had become a genuine artistic dialogue. Years later, when journalists would ask about the 1987 Oscars, both men would remember it not for the award but for the conversation. For the moment when two very different actors found common ground in their shared commitment to honest storytelling. Nicholson would often say in interviews that Caine had taught him to appreciate subtlety, to value emotional truth over technical virtuosity. Caine would credit Nicholson with reminding him that intensity and naturalism weren't mutually exclusive, that you could be both truthful and theatrical. If you've ever been dismissed for your approach to your craft, if you've ever been told that your way of doing things isn't serious enough or deep enough or impressive enough, Michael Caine's response to Jack Nicholson reminds us that excellence comes in many forms. That quiet truth can be just as powerful as loud truth. That serving the story matters more than showcasing yourself. And sometimes the best way to prove your worth isn't to change your approach but to explain it so clearly that even your critics can't help but understand and respect what you're trying to achieve.